Hello, everyone. This is Jules and Eugenie from the Anti-Slavery Collective, and we have the great pleasure of talking to Pete Beard today. Pete, tell everyone why we want to talk to you today and who you are.
So I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I'm talking to you today about a series that I've just directed for Channel 4 that's about an investigation into a human trafficking gang who have been trafficking women into the UK for the purposes of sexual exploitation.
And the name of that TV show is called Taken, Hunting Sex Traffickers, and you can watch it on Channel 4. So Pete, tell us about the series, what brought you to it, why you think it's important, the journey. We're longing to hear.
So we started developing the series in 2016, I think, was the initial conversations. So we've been interested in doing a series with a covert police unit. I have sort of specialized in my career in making documentaries in places that are difficult to access. So I've done lots of series about mental health, with some trying to sort of get inside how that works. And I made a film called My Son the Jihadi about radicalization. So lots of sorts of subject matters that are quite sort of sensitive and difficult to handle. So we were interested in trying to get inside a covert police unit and see how proactive policing works. So how the police try and tackle crime and go out and sort of find the bad guys rather than waiting for a crime to occur and then responding to it. And eventually, after some time, we got access to the Southwest Regional Organised Crime Unit. And when we spoke to them, they said, well, if you're going to follow a big investigation that's complicated and shows all of our work, we'd like nothing better than for you to follow a human trafficking and modern slavery investigation.
How do you actually follow them around? Sorry to interrupt, but how do you actually follow without them knowing?
So I basically, we had, without sort of giving away all the tradecraft, as they would you had, like the first encounter when we were doing the sort of shadowing to see if it'd be possible was them saying, turn up at our covert police location with an overnight bag. We can't tell you where you're going or what you're doing. So then we turned up, got sort of bundled into a car and spent the rest of the day following some drug traffickers. In fact, about sort of 3 days, feeling desperately sick in the back of a car. Trying to not be seen. So then we worked out a way to sort of be embedded with the surveillance officers. So to hide in various places in cars and to use cameras that didn't look like cameras and various other things. They run teams of surveillance officers where they will literally follow every move of an individual over a day, a week, a month, depending on how it works. Everyone they meet to build up a picture of how an organized crime group operates and how they might be able to interact with that to stop it.
This might be a really good question, but how come the police want you in the car with them? Because surely you might detract from their mission, or do they see it as a really valuable tool in raising awareness?
Exactly. I mean, it's exactly that. I think one, they wanted to show sort of transparency in their process. But I think also, human trafficking is a particularly difficult crime to prosecute. It's difficult because it is it's happening all around us all the time. Whether we like it or not, most of us have probably interacted with somebody who is in modern slavery or who's been trafficked. Lots of people don't see or understand the subtleties of that. They think that someone who's trafficked is sort of chained to a radiator and forced to do things. They don't realize that the control that's being exerted over people might be quite subtle, might not be obvious. But it is no less sort of powerful. And for the police, that makes it really difficult to prosecute because you're not seeing really obvious things. You're not necessarily dealing with victims who will consider themselves to be victims or who will ever come forward. So some victims might be terrified of their controllers and they might not come forward for that reason. But other victims might not really sort of see their exploitation in those terms. They might think, well, this is a lot more than I would be being paid in the place that I've come from, and the conditions might even be slightly better. It doesn't mean that they're not being exploited whilst they're here, and it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be stopped. So they wanted to show that, and in this instance, they realised that maybe packaging it up in something that was exciting, so following a covert police operation is quite exciting at times, and that might draw an audience to an important subject matter, which was, you know, the same thing that we have. If I say to lots of people, I want you to watch a series about human trafficking, a lot of people think that it might be too dark, it might be too hard work to watch, it might be a subject matter that, unless they are sort of personally interested in it, that they're not going to watch when they're sat down at 9 o'clock on their sofa, you know, wanting to relax. Whereas if you can sort of get the message across through stealth, it can be a bit easier.
I just noticed your BAFTAs in the corner of your office.
I try to leave them subtly there so no one notices, just over my shoulder.
Oh, brilliant. They're literally sitting on your shoulder.
Sometimes you sit across like that.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt again. Zoom's quite hard to interrupt on.
So that was the reason why they were happy for us to be there. Now, there were obviously a million limitations in terms of what I could show from the covert side of things in terms of tactics. What I tried to do was just immerse the audience in that world rather than explaining how it happened. But right from the start with Mark Viner, who was the sort of head of the organised crime group, you could tell he was definitely trafficking people and was definitely exploiting them. Proving that was a different matter, and that took 3 years really.
But actually, I think you didn't necessarily need to prove it. You could just you could see.
No, I had to watch them do it.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. But you could see from your camera really that he was trafficking them straight away. Could you? Yeah,
I mean, he was bringing lots of women into the country. Lots of those women went on immediately to sex work. Lots of them would be people that he would say he was in relationships with when he was bringing them over, but he was clearly profiting from them. He was paying for their travel. He was running several brothels, and he was an organised criminal. This was a man who, for his adult working life, has never had a job, but has a very, very lavish lifestyle, travels all around the world all the time, nips to Geneva for 3 hours at a time. He's sort of definitely an organised criminal. So yeah, it was obvious, but as a lay person watching it for the first time, you go, well, that person that he's bringing in looks happy. They look fine. They don't look like they're sort of broken. They don't look like they're obviously scared. So how do I, as a filmmaker, articulate that this person's being controlled? And that's what took a while, and what eventually led to us working really hard to find people who we could talk to, ideally people who were linked to the police operations involved in the case. But actually, I spent quite a lot of time before that speaking to charities and speaking to other sorts of politicians and various other people who were involved in different aspects of countering trafficking, speaking to the Salvation Army and the NRM, and speaking to people who had survived trafficking about how we might be able, what subtleties we should be looking for, and how we might be able to articulate that in the series. And
before you started this documentary, had you heard about modern slavery, and had it come across your radar?
Not at all. No, I mean, obviously I was aware of it in terms of the sort of buzzwords that you'd hear in the press.
Right. And
then when we started looking at this, there was a couple of really good Guardian long reads and stuff like that I sort of immersed myself in. And then
Guardian's great at reporting on this.
They do lots. And there's a really interesting one about sort of labour exploitation and how that turned into sort of sham marriages and things like that. But the immediate feeling that I had was just guilt, that I'd so clearly it, like, having my car washed for £5 didn't add up. Yeah. And sort of, buying the things that I undoubtedly I bought vegetables and stuff that had been picked by people illegally, walking down the street and realizing that lots of the sort of nail bars and stuff probably have people that have been trafficked into the UK. I think I was in the same sort of boat that lots of people are in, where they just imagine that illegal immigration, sort of smuggling people into the UK, is trafficking, rather than people who might very well just be coming here on a plane with a visa, looking like they're happy enough, but that's being sort of controlled and exploited.
Or based in the UK and from the UK and trafficked within the UK.
Yeah. I mean, the reality of so we were looking at South America specifically in this program, but the reality is lots of the people who, before they come to the UK and are trafficked there, they've already been trafficked domestically several times within Brazil. So it's...
Well, that was a big part of the documentary, was that a lot of them were prostitutes in Brazil, and then they came to the UK and were prostitutes, but for them, that was better than doing it back home. You know, so there's this.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm rabbiting on, Jules. I know you have a question waiting to ask, but it's such a difficult position.
Well, it's exactly that, and it's really interesting. I mean, so Sylvia, who is the woman, that's not her real name, it is the woman who we meet in episode 1 and episode 3, who I went to go and film in Brazil and remain in contact with. She is a very sort of classic story, came from a sort of a poor rural background, and had it was quite a controlling background that she came from, and she wanted to sort of escape to the big city, and the only way that she could, well, in fact, one of her friends had gone before and had started doing sex work, and she'd sort of followed doing the same thing. But, you know, never enjoyed the job, didn't want to be a sex worker. It was just a way to survive. And then the idea of being able to do it in the UK for so much more money, or, you know, she actually went to various other countries in Europe as well, seemed like a good option. But actually, as soon as she got here, she realized it wasn't a good option. She might have been earning loads of money, because even after that, the controllers are taking sort of 50%, you know, she would still be making a lot more money than she was in Brazil. But she was having to do things that she desperately didn't want to do. You know, in Brazil, she was her own boss.
Right.
Over here, she had to do whatever the house rules were. You know, the reality of working in a brothel in the UK that's controlled by an organised crime group, you can leave whenever you want, but you might not be able to take your passport with you. You might not be able to take your money with you that you just had to go through horrendous things to get. If you're going to stay, you have to work from 11 in the morning till 3 in the morning every day. You have to stay from Monday till Monday, because that's when the room's booked for. You have no choice. You have to sleep with every man that's sent up to you. And that was her reality for a long time in the UK. And so, yes, she, and I think the worst thing for her actually is the amount of money that she did earn. And then because she was so desperately unhappy, she just wasted. You know, it's not like she bought a house in Brazil to live in or something like that. She hated what was happening to her, and therefore she wasted her money. So the reason that she'd come for was not sort of delivered in the end either.
And Pete, throughout the series, we hear from survivors, anonymous survivors of human trafficking. And obviously, anonymity is really important when recording these people. What kind of measures did you put in place to ensure their safety?
So, I mean, it depends really. So there were some that the police interacted with, and I filmed those interactions. Those were always on a basis that they understood I was filming. Normally, they said they didn't want to be identified. Some people would say, I don't mind you filming, but can you stay out of the room and just record the sound? Or some people may have been happy for me to sort of film in the room. Normally, I would just show people what the shot looked like, because I'd be aware that with lots of people, you then lose contact immediately with them. You know, the phone numbers that they might give you will be dropped, or might be the sex work phone, so they're not ones that they'll keep with them, and it became quite difficult. So I would have quite a frank conversation with them at the beginning about whether they wanted their voice changed or anything like that, what details they didn't want shown or happy. With Sylvia, it was a lot lengthier process. You know, I've been in contact with her for a long time, so exactly, you know, she watched the final films before they were broadcast. She told me exactly which shots she was happy with and which details of her life she was happy with being involved. We had a whole duty of care plan around her in terms of how she felt about talking about the experiences. You know, she'd been a victim of physical assaults, of rape, of various other sorts of horrendous things. So how we could sort of manage her well-being and mental health around those being on TV. But these are things that I'm sort of used to doing from lots of the other programs that we've done before. And with people's, so you really just have to look at everyone as an individual and what would be their concern. So whether they're just worried about anyone sort of finding out about them, or if there are specific people, whether they're actually personally at risk as a consequence of talking to you. We can do quite a lot in post-production. We can remove, you know, birthmarks and moles and change sorts of colours of hair and do lots of stuff to make people anonymous. But the really important thing for me generally is that an audience can still emotionally connect with that person. Because if you dehumanize someone in that process, it goes completely against what you're trying to do. What you're trying to do is find a way for the audience to think that could be me, that could be my sister, daughter, you know.
That's also so true in what Jules and I and the slavery world is sort of doing, is amplifying and uplifting the voices of survivors, not not trying to take away their humanization, you know. But
it's so easy to do.
Interestingly, how did you, I'm sure you must have got like hours and hours and hours of footage. How did you cut or not have the right edit? How did you get the right edit so that it was as impactful as possible for all of us watching it?
It takes a long time, basically. So we filmed in the end over about 2 years. And you know, hundreds of hours of that are just sat in the back of a surveillance vehicle, sort of with a wobbly camera with everyone feeling sick. And there were lots of sort of storylines or lines of investigation that we followed that didn't necessarily work. So that was complicated. How do we make a really sort of complicated, multifaceted investigation distill it into a sort of engaging storyline? It was a lot less hard work with the victims and survivors because I didn't film so much with them, and almost everything that they said, you hung off their words, you know. So with Sylvia, I actually only filmed with her for a couple of days in Brazil because she was trying to return to the UK to go through it all again, essentially, because she needed more money. But essentially, for me, it's always about how do I make this person who might be going through an entirely alien experience to you or I or lots of the viewers at home, how do I give enough details of their life that you could think, well, that's a bit like me. So Sylvia mentioning her mum said you don't have to go and do this, or she was trying to save money for university. Little things like that wouldn't give away who she is, but would allow you to think, God, that could be me. Interestingly, when the sort of security consultant for the Regional Organised Crime Unit, the person who's there to make sure I don't give any tactics away that could ruin investigations, when he watched it, he phoned me up straight away and said, God, I just saw my daughter when I was seeing that, because she's off to university at the moment. And I thought, wow, if I could even get a hard-bitten cop to emotionally engage with that, I've done all right.
You've succeeded. And on that point, what is the sort of lasting impact or emotion you want viewers to feel, or message you want people to take away when they watch Taken?
I suppose, so I leave the sort of series is left with Mark Viner being extradited from Spain, where he's sort of set up his retirement back to the UK. That episode hasn't been on TV yet, but it is available online. So,
spoiler alert, yeah.
Spoiler alert. And with Sylvia returning to the UK to sort of do it all again. Now, and she I filmed her walking through airports and various other things, looking like a sort of a normal tourist coming into the UK. And with Mark Viner in sort of shackles. And so what I was trying to get away from that is that these people going through it might be all around you. And you should really look for the sorts of subtleties of what are happening. And this whole investigation, the whole thing started from an anonymous letter being dropped off at a police station. You know, it came because a member of the public came forward and said that they'd seen something. Now, if we all do that, because the reality is there's sort of, you know, there's brothels with people being exploited, there's labor exploitation, there's car washes everywhere, right? I mean, the places in London that we were going to when I was following the surveillance team were everywhere, from the most down at heel places to sort of, you know, Mayfair, Kensington and Chelsea. They weren't, they were in sort of very smart, very well-to-do areas. People must notice, right, if there's a different bloke turning up every hour outside.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point. It's like, have the courage to report something if it doesn't feel right. And if it leads to nothing, so what? But
yeah,
that whoever handed in that anonymous letter had the courage to follow their instinct.
Julie, like that's the same as what we just heard. We read this book called Half the Sky, and there's a parable in it which says this man goes up to a little boy who's throwing starfish back into the ocean, and there's hundreds of starfish, and he's like, why are you doing that? You're not going to make a difference. And he goes, well, I made a difference to that one starfish's life. And
exactly.
that's plural of starfishes. I don't know what.
It's exactly that. Yeah, I mean, if you stop one Mark Viner, that's not going to stop trafficking, but you can definitely have an impact on all of the people's lives that he'll ruin. Now, you know, of the ones that I know about with Mark Viner, that goes, you know, into sort of 20, 30, 40 people. So if you think, you know, if everyone does that in every area, then that would start to help. And I think he's still misunderstood. there are crimes in these areas in sort of exploitation that we now understand better as a society. Things like domestic violence or child sexual exploitation. We don't question those things anymore. We don't question, a sort of 15-year-old girl who's sleeping with adults as being anything other than a victim. We don't question that, the sort of husband or wife that stays with their partner that beats them as a sort of victim anymore. But we still do seem to question the people who are earning money at their car wash, or the sex workers who, are earning money as victims, which I think is ridiculous because they all fit in the same category of exploitation.
And do you think that you will continue with doing documentaries and work in this field now that you've done your documentary series already, or is this, are you neatly tying a bow on it?
I never say never. So for instance, the first mental health series I made took about 2 years to make, and I thought, I'm never doing another one again. It's so difficult to get it on screen. I'm never going to do it again. And then I've made another 2 series subsequently. So I think I probably will return to this subject matter because there's so much to say on it, and there's so many different things to explore.
Well, we're really chuffed to bits that you want to continue doing that, because it's so incredible to see it on TV, I think. And I think more people need to be able to be touched when it comes to mainstream media. And it's incredible that you're using your voice to be able to make a difference. So thank you.
And so clever as well to use the name Taken, because it's, when I saw that, I immediately associate it as the sort of real life version of the film. So it was very
well, that's Channel 4 trying to get as many viewers as possible.
Yeah, it's clever. It's really clever.
They are, yeah. I mean, that's what I always say with these things.
Awareness, yeah.
Because what I try to not make, so there are 500,000 people who read The Guardian who would always watch these programs, right? That's a sort of reality. They'd always be interested. And it's great if they watch this, but they should not be the person that I'm making it for. You should try and make it for the people who wouldn't normally engage with this subject matter.
Well,
we struggle with that the whole time. It's like, how do you create new content to capture a new audience?
And Pete, thank you so much for your time today and for creating something so great, because we loved it. And we hope everyone who's watching today will also love it and go and watch it. Thank you for your time and your dedication to this. And we'd be happy to do a documentary with you in the future if you want.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you so much for your time. And everybody tune in to Taken on Channel 4.
Bye.